So aside from Sessue Hayakawa and Anna May Wong, this isn't to say that these are the only Asian American actors or Asian Pacific American actors out there. And I did count Sessue Hayakawa as an Asian American actor primarily because he gets the start acting not in Asia but in the United States, right? He's pretty much American by the time that he becomes an actor. But again, when you have Asian American actors working, but they're primarily going to be pushed towards the background, they're not going to get the leading roles for the most part. And especially for Asian American women and Asian American actresses, they're going to be cast in very, very specific roles. Again, they might get lead roles, but if they get lead roles, they're going to be cast as, again, the romantic lead in a particular coupling. Something like Japanese War Bride, where Shirley Yamaguchi, who is, again, Japanese American, portrays a Japanese woman who marries a U.S. serviceman in the aftermath of World War II and then returns to the United States with her husband and then finds conflict with his family in California. And so you have this particular, clash of cultures that takes place in this small town in California. It's an actually interesting movie because there's also a subplot where the Shirley Yamaguchi character is suspected of having an affair with a Japanese American farmer because again, all Japanese stick together, when in reality he is not having an affair with her. He's just simply befriending her because she feels alone and isolated, being the only other Japanese face in this town, largely of Caucasians. Then you have Tea House of the August Moon, which is again, kind of a situation comedy, less of a romantic comedy, even though there's kind of these hints of, trying to get romantic undertones with Machiko Kyo and the Glenn Ford character, which you see there, sort of kneeling in front of each other. This is really kind of trying to make light of the American occupation of Okinawa, where the entire joke is that, the Americans are trying to Americanize and sort of, democratize Okinawa, and Okinawa responds, or this particular village in Okinawa responds by running an underground, liquor distillation operation, right? This is how they're going to modernize, their particular village. And as you can see there, Marlon Brando is top billed. Marlon Brando is actually playing a Okinawan, villager who is, acting as the primary translator for the American servicemen with the villagers. And as you can see, they're part of this. And he's trying to use, the Okinawan women to seduce and kind of, get one over on the American servicemen. Marlon Brando is also going to start another movie called Sayonara, which is again about the American occupation in Japan, and it's primarily about the American military's opposition to servicemen marrying Japanese women and then bringing them back to the United States as brides. And so here, this is the story of Marlon Brando falling in love with Miko Taka, who is a Japanese performer. Also in this movie, by the way, you have Ricardo Montalban again playing a Japanese performer. So you have a Mexican American in makeup playing a Japanese. So you can see how Hollywood goes through all these different steps to not cast Asian American actors. Although it was interesting for Ricardo Montalban to get a role there. This is also a breakthrough role for Miyoshi Umeki, who gets nominated for an Academy Award for playing kind of a parallel story to the Marlon Brando romance, because Miyoshi Umeki, who is Japanese, a Japanese actress, falls in love with an American serviceman, Red Buttons. They get married, but they end up, because they are prohibited from return to the United States, choose another solution to their particular problem. And then lastly, you have World of Susie Wong, which is William Holden playing an American expatriate artist who goes over to Hong Kong and then begins sketching, right, and using Nancy Kwan's character Susie Wong as a model, and eventually falls in love with her. So Nancy Kwan plays kind of a bar girl / prostitute, and it's about their romance and, the fact that he's undecided whether he wants to return to the United States and bring Susie Wong with him to the United States. And so you can see that all these movies and countless others will have this particular coupling, right? Asian woman, American, right, Caucasian American, sometimes servicemen, but sometimes expatriate, and the idea of bringing them back or returning to the United States with them. So that's one really limited portrayal for Asian American actresses in this particular period from the 1950s to the 1960s. It wasn't really that much better for male actors either. So again, primarily they're going to be used as, if they're not villains, they're going to be used as comic relief sometimes. Here you see Burt Kwok, who's going to portray Kato, who is the kind of comic sidekick in the Pink Panther movies. He's starts out as maybe an assassin, but then becomes kind of the manservant for Inspector Clouseau, and really he becomes only present as a running gag throughout a series of 6 movies over 30 years, where his entire role in the movie is to attack Inspector Clouseau when he's not aware, just to keep Inspector Clouseau on his toes and make sure that he's not falling asleep on the job, and is always aware of the danger around him. So that's kind of the running gag. And again, this doesn't mean that this is the only role that Burt Kwok gets, but this is the role that he gets the most notoriety for, rather than just being kind of a good actor. And then you have something like Thoroughly Modern Millie in 1967, which is a musical starring Julie Andrews and Carol Channing. But it's also known primarily because it features these 2 characters played by Jack Soo, who's really, his birth name is Goro Suzuki. Jack Soo actually changed his name from Goro Suzuki to a Chinese name because he thinks that as a Japanese American or Japanese name, he won't get roles in the post-World War II era. And then you have on the background there Pat Morita, who you might recognize more from the Karate Kid movies, again, Japanese American actor. And again, here they're playing stereotypical Chinese henchmen, and they actually have very few lines. They're sort of kind of silent, villains in this particular movie. And the reason I bring up Thoroughly Modern Millie is because even though it's a movie from 1967, it gets turned into a musical, and it's a musical that consistently gets staged by high schools more and more in the United States. And so part of the more recent problem with these stagings of Thoroughly Modern Millie is how do they deal with the really horrifically stereotypical and racist portrayals of these 2 characters. Do they write out these characters? Do they make them not Asian? Do they try to, eliminate them altogether, right? Or, make them a different ethnicity, make them, Caucasian? Again, this is part of the difficulty that, high school musical directors now have to deal with if they want to put on a movie that does have good songs and good, sequences, but again has this particularly problematic portrayal of Asian characters. This is the same thing that people will run into when they try to put on Mikado, which is even more. That's from the 19th century. It's a Gilbert and Sullivan musical. That's really kind of a parody of a medieval Japan, but horribly racist, and of course not at all what people would consider as a true representation of what Japan is ever like. But this doesn't mean that this is the only way that Asian American actors are going to be seen in the 1950s and 1960s. And the case in point is this actor, James Shigeta. This is James Shigeta in his younger years. And so James Shigeta actually gets started as a romantic lead. And even though his movies are not necessarily Hollywood blockbusters, right, these are not going to be big budget movies, but he does get roles primarily where he is the romantic lead. And his first starring role is in this movie, The Crimson Kimono, directed by Samuel Fuller, where James Shigeta plays a detective in Little Tokyo, Los Angeles, California, and he's investigating a murder with his white partner, and he eventually falls in love with one of the potential witnesses or potential target for one of the murderer in the movie. And so it becomes it's a murder mystery initially, but it really is more of a interracial romance. And as you can see, they're daring enough to show an Asian American man kissing a white actress in the not only in the movie but in the promotional material. This leads to them James Shigeta's next movie, which is Bridge to the Sun, which is a adaptation, dramatization of a true story of a Japanese diplomat in pre-World War II Japan who comes to the United States. He marries an American woman. They return to Japan, and just before the outbreak of World War II, he urges her to return to the United States alone, with their child, so that she can avoid any of the problems with the outbreak of war. She refuses, and she actually stays in Japan with them. And of course, there's also these tragic consequences from that because she decides to remain in Japan. But again, James Shigeta plays a romantic lead in this role. And again, the romantic lead with a white Caucasian woman, Caucasian actress. And then lastly, in the 1960s, James Shigeta also, gets to show off his talent as a, singer and a dancer in the Flower Drum Song, which is the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical, which is set in San Francisco Chinatown. So James Shigeta gets to, sort of cross ethnicities and play Chinese. But again, here he gets to play the romantic lead because part of the entire story is about his particular character and trying to decide which of these two Chinese American women he wants to actually marry, the kind of party girl / dancer played by Nancy Kwan, or the recent immigrant played by Miyoshi Umeki, who is kind of more quiet and traditional, almost idealized, Asian immigrant wife. And of course, you can guess who he chooses because this is the 1960s. Don't worry, Nancy Kwan actually finds love as well. And so this is, the role of James Shigeta. He can actually be not just a romantic lead, but a convincing romantic lead in the 1950s and 1960s. And eventually then, obviously, as he gets older, his career sort of drifts to the background and becomes much more of a supporting character. His most famous role in his later career is going to be as the Japanese businessman in the first Die Hard movie with Bruce Willis, who meets an unfortunate end at the hand of the Alan Rickman villain. But you can see that, again, there's some progression and there's some possibility and some precedent for Asian American actors to actually get roles as leading men beyond, the comic relief that you see in the 1950s and 1960s. So that's it. There's one more part of this particular lecture. It's going to be a lot quicker, a lot shorter, so come back and we'll finish up this week.